January 7, 1945, Versailles, France. General Omar Nelson Bradley sits alone in his office at SHAEF Forward Headquarters. Outside, snow falls on the cobblestones. Inside, Bradley reviews casualty reports from the Battle of the Bulge, page after page, name after name. 20,000 American soldiers, dead or missing. He knows some of these units. He knows some of these commanders. He commanded 1st Army before taking over 12th Army Group. These are his men. Colonel Chester Hansen, his aide-de-camp, enters without knocking. That's unusual. Hansen always knocks. He's carrying a piece of paper, a teletype transcript, still warm from the machine. Hansen says, "Sir, you need to see this immediately." Bradley looks up. What is it? Field Marshal Montgomery held a press conference this morning, in Brussels. This is the transcript. Bradley takes the paper. He reads. His jaw tightens. His face, normally calm and controlled, goes white. He reads it again, then a third time. Finally, he looks up at Hansen and says one word. Eisenhower. Hansen says, "Sir, get me General Eisenhower on the phone." Now, what Bradley just read would trigger the worst crisis in Allied command during the entire war. What he said in the phone call that followed would force Dwight Eisenhower to make an impossible choice: save the alliance with Britain or defend the honor of the United States Army. He couldn't do both. And before this week was over, Bradley would deliver an ultimatum that would rip 200,000 American soldiers out of British command and nearly shatter the coalition that was 50 miles from winning the war. If you want to hear the untold stories of World War II, the moments that decided history, the conversations that changed everything, then hit that subscribe button right now and join the elite War Files community. We bring you the truth behind the headlines, the real words, the real decisions. This is one of those stories. Bradley stands and walks to the map on his wall. It shows the Western Front, the Bulge, the German breakthrough in the Ardennes that started on December 16th, 3 weeks ago. The map is covered in unit markers. American divisions, British divisions, the frontline corrections marked in red pencil day by day as the Americans pushed the Germans back. Hansen watches him. Bradley is not a man who loses his temper. He's not Patton. He doesn't yell or throw things or make dramatic speeches. He's the quiet professional, the steady hand, Eisenhower's most trusted general. But right now, Hansen can see something in Bradley's eyes he's never seen before. Cold fury. Bradley turns from the map. When did this press conference happen? Hansen checks his notes. This morning, sir, 1100 hours Brussels time. It's already being reprinted in London. The Daily Mail headline is, "Monty's Finest Hour." The Times is running Field Marshal's masterstroke saves American front. Bradley closes his eyes for a moment. When he opens them, he says, "Read me the key section again." Hansen reads from the transcript. Montgomery's words, direct quotes. The situation began to deteriorate, but the whole Allied team rallied to meet the danger. I took certain steps myself to ensure that if the Germans got to the Meuse, they would certainly not get over that river. I employed the whole available power of the British group of armies. You have this picture of British troops fighting on both sides of American forces who have suffered a hard blow. This is a fine Allied picture. Bradley says, "Keep reading," Hansen continues. "The battle has been most interesting. I think possibly one of the most interesting and tricky battles I have ever handled." Bradley's voice is flat. One of the most interesting battles he ever handled. Hansen, how many British divisions were engaged in the Bulge? 2, sir, maybe 3 if you count rear area security. How many British casualties? Hansen flips through his papers. 1,400, sir, total. Killed, wounded, and missing combined. And American casualties? 81,000, sir, as of this morning's count. Bradley walks back to his desk. He picks up another report. The order of battle. He studies it. Then he does the math out loud. Montgomery commanded 2 British divisions, approximately 30,000 men. Meanwhile, we had the 101st Airborne surrounded at Bastogne. We had the 2nd Armored Division stop the German spearhead at Celles. We had the 82nd Airborne hold the northern shoulder. We had Patton's 3rd Army drive 100 miles through a blizzard to relieve Bastogne. We had 600,000 American soldiers engaged. And Montgomery is telling the world press that he handled this battle, that British troops fought on both sides of Americans who suffered a hard blow. Hansen says nothing. There's nothing to say. Bradley picks up the phone. "Get me General Eisenhower at main headquarters. Priority 1. While they wait for the call to connect, Bradley sits down. He opens his desk drawer and pulls out a folder. It's marked Command Structure Bulge. He reviews the documents inside. On December 20th, 4 days after the German breakthrough, Eisenhower made a tactical decision. The German offensive had split the American front in 2. Communications between Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg and the Northern Armies, 1st and 9th, were disrupted, so Eisenhower temporarily placed those two armies under Montgomery's 21st First Army Group for operational coordination. Not command, coordination. It was supposed to be temporary, just until the front stabilized. Bradley had agreed to it at the time. It made sense tactically, but it was supposed to be quiet. No announcements, no press releases, just a temporary battlefield adjustment. And it was supposed to end as soon as the crisis passed. Montgomery was supposed to coordinate, not command, not take credit, not tell the world that he saved the Americans. The phone rings. Hansen picks up, listens, then hands it to Bradley. "General Eisenhower, sir." Bradley's voice is cold and controlled. "Ike, have you seen the transcript from Montgomery's press conference?" Eisenhower's voice comes through, weary and strained. "I'm reading it now, Brad. I know how this looks." How it looks? He told the world that American command collapsed, that he had to come save us. He's taking credit for what Patton, Hodges, and Collins did, for what the 101st did at Bastogne, for what 30 American divisions did while his 2 divisions watched from the sidelines. The press twisted his words. You know how Monty is with reporters. He doesn't think before he speaks. The press didn't put those words in his mouth. I took certain steps. I employed the whole available power of the British group of armies, one of the most interesting battles I have ever handled. Ike, he commanded 2 British divisions. 2. While 600,000 Americans bled to stop that breakthrough, we've got 81,000 casualties. He's got 1,400. And now he's the hero? There's a pause. Then Eisenhower says, "What do you want me to do? We're 50 miles from the Rhine. Churchill is already breathing down my neck about giving Monty the northern route to Berlin. The British press is making this into their finest hour. If I make a big deal out of this now, it becomes an international incident." Bradley's voice drops even lower. "I want American armies back under American command. All of them. 1st Army. 9th Army. Immediately." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Eisenhower says, "Brad, if I pull 1st and 9th Armies away from Monty right now, Churchill will go directly to Roosevelt. The British newspapers will scream about American generals throwing tantrums, about prima donnas who can't take orders from a British commander. We could split the alliance." Then it splits. What? Then it splits. Because if those armies stay under Montgomery's command for one more day, you're going to need a new 12th Army Group commander.
Silence on the line.
Complete silence. Bradley can hear Eisenhower breathing, can hear papers rustling, can hear someone talking in the background at Chef Main headquarters. Finally, Eisenhower says, "Are you threatening to resign? I'm telling you what I'll do. You make your choice." More silence. Then Eisenhower says, "Give me 48 hours. Bradley looks at his watch. "You've got 24. He hangs up. Hansen stares at him. Bradley has never in 3 years of war spoken to Eisenhower like that. Never delivered an ultimatum. Never threatened resignation. This is not how Bradley operates. But Hansen understands why. He was there when Bradley read the casualty lists this morning. 20,000 names. And now those men's families are going to open their newspapers and read that a British field marshal saved their sons. That American command failed. That Americans needed rescuing. Bradley says, "Hansen, I want you to get me every report we have on British participation in the Bulge. Every unit, every engagement, every casualty figure. I want documentation of exactly what Montgomery's forces did and didn't do, and I want the exact text of the December 20th order that placed 1st and 9th Armies under his coordination. Not command, coordination. Get me those documents within the hour." "Yes, sir." Bradley stands. He walks to the window. Outside, American trucks roll past. Supply convoys heading to the front. Replacements heading to decimated divisions. Ambulances bringing wounded back. The machinery of the United States Army fighting its way across Europe, 50 miles from Germany's heartland. And somewhere in Brussels, Montgomery is holding press conferences. What Bradley said next would force Eisenhower to make the hardest choice of the war: save the alliance or defend American honor. He couldn't do both. The next morning, January 8th, Bradley's worst fears are confirmed. British newspapers hit the stands with banner headlines. The Daily Express, "Montgomery halts, German tide." The Times, "Field Marshal's masterstroke saves American front." The Daily Telegraph, "Monty's finest hour, British general takes command of faltering American armies." The stories are worse than the headlines. They describe Montgomery riding to the rescue, taking control of confused American forces, bringing British discipline and tactical brilliance to bear. Some papers barely mention American units at all. The 101st Airborne stand at Bastogne, one of the greatest defensive actions in American military history, is reduced to a footnote. Patton's relief drive is described as supporting Montgomery's coordinated counteroffensive. At 10 Downing Street in London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill reads the coverage over breakfast. He's pleased. Montgomery has been asking for overall ground command for months. Churchill has been pushing Eisenhower to give it to him. And now, finally, the British public sees what Churchill has known all along. Montgomery is the superior strategist. This press conference might give Churchill the ammunition he needs to convince Roosevelt that Montgomery should command the final drive into Germany. Churchill cables Eisenhower that morning. The message is diplomatic but clear. Montgomery's success in the Bulge proves he should lead the main thrust across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. The American armies should support the British drive from the south. It's time, Churchill suggests, to put the best man in charge of finishing the war. At the same time, in Luxembourg, word of Montgomery's press conference spreads through American command like wildfire. At 3rd Army Headquarters, General George S. Patton reads the transcript. His staff watches him turn red, then purple. Then he crumples the paper and throws it across the room. Patton's Chief of Staff, General Hobart Gay, says, "George, don't do anything rash." Patton says, "That limey son of a bitch, that pompous, arrogant, credit-stealing bastard. I drove 100 miles in 3 days through a blizzard to save Bastogne. My boys fought in sub-zero weather with no winter gear. We lost 10,000 men breaking through to the 101st. And Montgomery is telling the world he handled the battle? I'll reason before I take another order from that man. Not one more order." At 1st Army Headquarters, General Courtney Hodges has the same reaction. 1st Army bore the initial German assault. 1st Army held the northern shoulder. 1st Army stopped the German advance toward Liège. And now 1st Army is reading British newspapers saying they needed Montgomery to save them. Hodges sends a message directly to Bradley. Request immediate return to 12th Army Group Command. Current arrangement is untenable. At 9th Army Headquarters, General William Simpson, normally the most diplomatic of American commanders, sends a similar message. If the current command arrangement continues, request permission to resign and return to the United States. By mid-afternoon on January 8th, Bradley has messages from all 3 of his Army commanders. All 3 are requesting transfer back to his command. All 3 are threatening resignation if forced to continue under Montgomery. But the worst is yet to come. The American press corps in Europe gets hold of the story. They cable their editors in New York, Washington, and Chicago. By evening, American newspapers are preparing their own headlines. But the American spin is different, very different. The New York Times writes, "British general claims credit for American victory." The Chicago Tribune, never friendly to the British, goes further. Montgomery steals glory while Americans die. The Washington Post runs an editorial questioning why American soldiers are under British command at all. At the Pentagon, Army Chief of Staff General George C. 10th Marshall starts receiving phone calls. Angry phone calls from congressmen, from senators, from the Secretary of War. All asking the same question: why is a British general commanding American boys? Why is Bradley, one of America's best generals, being sidelined? What is Eisenhower thinking? Marshall cables Eisenhower. The Montgomery press conference has created a political firestorm in Washington. The president is receiving inquiries. Congress is demanding answers. You need to resolve this immediately. But while Eisenhower is trying to negotiate peace between Bradley and Montgomery, trying to calm Churchill, trying to manage Marshall, someone leaks the story to the American press corps. Not just the press conference, the whole story. Bradley's phone call, the ultimatum, the threatened resignations. On January 9th, American newspapers run a new round of stories. These are different. These are about the crisis behind the scenes, about Bradley threatening to resign, about Patton and Hodges and Simpson backing him, about the potential collapse of American command in Europe. The headlines write themselves. American generals revolt against British control. Bradley defies Eisenhower over Montgomery. Alliance in crisis. At SHAEF main headquarters, Eisenhower is caught in an impossible position. Churchill is calling him, demanding that Montgomery get overall ground command for the final offensive. Marshall is cabling him, warning that Congress might cut funding if American troops remain under British command. Bradley is refusing to attend planning meetings if Montgomery is present. The entire command structure of the Western Front is paralyzed. And through it all, Montgomery still doesn't understand what he's done. On the morning of January 9th, Montgomery sends a message to Eisenhower through his Chief of Staff, Major General Francis Freddie de Guingamp. The message is, in Montgomery's view, helpful and conciliatory. In Bradley's view, it's gasoline on a fire. Montgomery writes that he doesn't understand why the Americans are so upset. He was merely stating facts about the battlefield situation. The American front did collapse initially. He did take coordinated control. He did employ British forces to stabilize the situation. These are simply facts. Why are the Americans being so emotional about facts? Furthermore, Montgomery suggests this incident proves his point. He should command all Allied ground forces for the Rhine crossing and the final drive into Germany. Clearly, American commanders are too emotionally involved, too sensitive to criticism, to make objective tactical decisions. The solution is obvious. Give Montgomery overall command. Let the professionals handle the war. The message never officially reaches Eisenhower, but it doesn't need to. Allied communications are semi-shared at the highest levels. Bradley's intelligence officer sees a copy. Within hours, every American commander in Europe knows what Montgomery said. Patton's reaction is immediate and documented in his diary. I would rather be commanded by a German than by Montgomery. At Bradley's headquarters, his chief of staff, General Lev Allen, says, "Sir, if General Eisenhower caves on this, if he gives Montgomery overall ground command, half the American officer corps will request transfers. This isn't about ego anymore. This is about whether American soldiers will be commanded by Americans or by the British." Bradley nods. He's already reached the same conclusion. This isn't about one press conference anymore. This isn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This is about command structure, about accountability, about who leads American soldiers into battle and who gets credit when they die. Bradley begins drafting a formal letter to Eisenhower. Not a phone call this time, a written document for the official record. The letter is short and unambiguous. General Eisenhower, 1st and 9th Armies must return to 12th Army Group Command within 48 hours. If this does not occur, I will resign my command and request immediate return to the United States. I have spoken with Generals Hodges, Simpson, and Patton. All three have stated they will do the same. Respectfully, Omar Bradley, Lieutenant General commanding 12th Army Group. He signs it, seals it, hands it to Hansen. Deliver this personally to General Eisenhower. Wait for a response. Hansen takes the letter. He understands what it means. This is the nuclear option. This is 4 of America's top combat generals threatening to resign simultaneously. If this letter becomes public, it will destroy Eisenhower's career. It will embarrass Roosevelt. It will shatter the alliance. But if Eisenhower doesn't comply, he loses his entire American command structure. And that's when George Patton does what George Patton always does. He picks up the phone and calls someone who can make this even more complicated, a war correspondent from the New York Herald Tribune. What Patton says in that phone call will turn a private command crisis into a public explosion that reaches all the way to the White House. Meanwhile, at Montgomery's headquarters in Belgium, Major General de Guingond realizes something terrible is happening. De Guingond is Montgomery's chief of staff and one of the few British officers who understands Americans. He spent time with Bradley. He respects him. And he knows that Bradley is not a man who bluffs. De Guingond reads the message Montgomery sent to Eisenhower. He closes his eyes. Then he picks up the phone and calls Montgomery's office. "Sir, we have a serious problem. Montgomery is reviewing plans for the Rhine crossing. He's in an excellent mood. The press conference went well. The British papers are singing his praises. Churchill is backing him for overall command. Everything is proceeding exactly as it should." Montgomery says, "What problem, Freddie?" "The Americans are threatening to resign. All of them. Bradley, Patton, Hodges, Simpson. They're refusing to serve under your command." Montgomery waves his hand dismissively. "They're being emotional. Americans are always emotional. Eisenhower will handle them." "Sir, with respect, this is not emotional. Bradley has submitted a formal resignation letter. If Eisenhower accepts it, the entire American command structure collapses. Then Eisenhower won't accept it. Simple. Sir, Bradley has made it clear he won't serve under British command, and Eisenhower cannot afford to lose him. The political consequences in America would be catastrophic. Congress would explode. Roosevelt might have to recall Eisenhower." Montgomery finally looks up from his maps. "You're saying Eisenhower might side with Bradley over me?" "I'm saying Eisenhower has no choice. Sir, you need to call him. You need to smooth this over. Now, before it's too late." But Montgomery doesn't call. He doesn't see the urgency. He's Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery. He commands the 21st Army Group. He's Britain's most famous general. The Americans are subordinate allies who need to accept British leadership. This will blow over. It doesn't blow over. By January 10th, the story has reached Washington. President Roosevelt receives a briefing. Secretary of War Henry Stimson calls an emergency meeting. Congressional leaders demand answers. The question is simple. Are American soldiers under British command or not? And if so, why? Marshall cables Eisenhower again, this time with brutal clarity. The president wants this resolved within 24 hours. Either Bradley's armies return to American command or you provide written justification for keeping them under Montgomery. Congressional hearings are being discussed. At SHAEF headquarters, Eisenhower sits alone in his office. On his desk are 3 documents. Bradley's resignation letter. Churchill's cable demanding Montgomery get overall command. Marshall's ultimatum from Washington. He can't satisfy all three. It's impossible. If he sides with Bradley, Churchill will go to Roosevelt and possibly threaten to withdraw British cooperation for the final offensive. If he sides with Montgomery, he loses his entire American command staff and faces congressional investigations. If he tries to compromise, he satisfies no one and looks weak. There's a knock on his door. His chief of staff enters. "Sir, General Bradley is here. He says he needs to see you immediately." Eisenhower looks at the clock. It's been 24 hours since Bradley's ultimatum. Exactly 24 hours. Eisenhower says, "Send him in." Bradley enters. He's in full uniform, ramrod straight. His face is composed, but his eyes are hard. He doesn't sit down, he stands at attention in front of Eisenhower's desk. Eisenhower looks up at him. These two men have been friends for 25 years. They went to West Point together. They served together in the Philippines. They planned the North Africa invasion together. They've trusted each other through 3 years of war. And now they're on opposite sides of an impossible decision. Eisenhower says, "Brad, sit down, please." Bradley remains standing. "I'll stand, sir. Is 1st Army coming back to 12th Army Group, or am I going back to the States?" Eisenhower stands as well. Now they're face to face. Equals. Friends. Commanders. Eisenhower says, "I've made my decision." The room goes silent. Outside, staff officers are working. Phones are ringing. The machinery of command continues. But in this office, everything has stopped. Everything depends on the next words out of Eisenhower's mouth. Eisenhower says, "1st Army returns to your command immediately, effective 1200 hours today. 9th Army will follow as soon as the current operations around the Roer dams are complete, no later than the end of February. Montgomery's command authority over American forces is terminated." Bradley's shoulders relax slightly, but he doesn't smile. He says, "And the spring offensive? Who commands the main thrust across the Rhine?" "You do. 12th Army Group will make the primary effort. You'll have priority for reinforcements, for supplies, for air support. Montgomery's 21st Army Group will support you from the north." He's going to scream to Churchill. Eisenhower sits back down. Prent. Suddenly, he looks very tired. He already has. Churchill screamed to Roosevelt. Marshall screamed back at Churchill, and I've been screaming at everyone for the past 3 days. Bradley finally sits. "What did you tell them?" Eisenhower looks at him. "I told them all the same thing. I told Churchill that Montgomery held an unauthorized press conference that violated Allied protocol. I told Roosevelt that Bradley drew a line after 81,000 American casualties, and I will not cross that line. I told Marshall that 1st and 9th Armies are returning to American command and Montgomery will follow my orders or I'll relieve him myself. And I told Montgomery that if he ever speaks to the press without my direct authorization again, he can find a new job." Bradley says, "What did Montgomery say?" "He finally called this morning, after de Guingamp scared him badly enough. He offered what he called an apology. He said he didn't mean to offend American sensibilities, that the press misinterpreted his remarks, that he has the utmost respect for American fighting ability. That's not an apology, that's Montgomery explaining why everyone else is wrong to be offended." Eisenhower allows himself a small, grim smile. "Yes, that's exactly what it was, but it's the best we're going to get from him. And honestly, Brad, I don't care anymore. I care about ending this war, and I can't end it if my commanders are resigning. I can't end it if my command structure is paralyzed. I can't end it if Congress is investigating me. So Montgomery can keep his non-apology. You're getting your armies back. That's what matters." Bradley nods slowly. Then he says, "Ike, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. Did you ever consider accepting my resignation? Keeping the armies under Montgomery to preserve the alliance?" Eisenhower is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "For about 30 seconds, yes. I considered it, because Churchill made it very clear that if I pull those armies away from Montgomery, he's going to fight me on every decision for the rest of the war. He'll demand Montgomery get Berlin. He'll block supplies. He'll make my life hell. And then I remembered something you said in Sicily. After Patton slapped that soldier, you told me that command isn't about making everyone happy. It's about making the right decision even when everyone's angry about it. And the right decision here is obvious. Montgomery held a press conference. You drew a line. And when an American general draws a line after 81,000 of his men have bled, I don't cross it." Bradley looks at Eisenhower. Really looks at him. The man is exhausted. He's aged 10 years in the last 3 months. The weight of coalition command, of balancing Churchill and Roosevelt, of managing prima donnas like Patton and Montgomery, of coordinating millions of soldiers across a 1,000-mile front, it's crushing him. Bradley says, "For what it's worth, Ike, I'm sorry I put you in this position. Eisenhower shakes his head. You didn't put me here, Montgomery did. And honestly, Brad, I'm glad you drew that line, because you were right. This isn't about ego, it's about accountability. Montgomery took credit for a victory won with American blood, your men's blood. And if I let that stand, if I let American armies stay under his command after that press conference, then I'm telling every American soldier in this theater that their sacrifice doesn't matter. That British prestige is more important than American honor. I can't do that. I won't do that. He stands again, walks to the map on his wall, the same map Bradley has in his office. The Western Front, the bulge, now pushed back. The Rhine River 50 miles ahead. Eisenhower says, "This is the United States Army. We've come 3,000 miles to liberate Europe. We've lost hundreds of thousands of men doing it. And we're going to finish this war on our terms, under our command, with our men getting the credit they deserve." Montgomery can accept that, or he can go home. Those are his options. And if Churchill doesn't like it, he can take it up with Roosevelt. But I'm done negotiating about this. Bradley stands as well. For the first time in 3 days, he allows himself to relax. Thank you, Ike. Don't thank me. You forced my hand. You gave me an ultimatum. That's not how we usually work. No, but Montgomery didn't leave me any choice, and I wasn't bluffing. If those armies had stayed under his command, I was done. I was going home. Eisenhower nods. I know. That's why I made this decision. Because I know you well enough to know when you're serious. And you were serious. They shake hands. Then Bradley turns to leave. At the door, he pauses. One more thing, Ike. What do we tell the press about all this? Eisenhower smiles. A real smile this time. We tell them that Field Marshal Montgomery performed admirably in coordinating operations during the Bulge emergency. And we tell them that now that the emergency has passed, 1st and 9th Armies are returning to 12th Army Group Command for the spring offensive. We make it sound routine, planned, expected. We don't make it sound like what it actually was.
Which was the worst command crisis of the war.
One that almost destroyed the alliance and ended both our careers. Bradley nods. Routine, got it. He leaves. Eisenhower sits back down at his desk. He pulls out a piece of paper and begins drafting a message to Montgomery. The message is polite but cold. It informs Montgomery that his temporary coordination of 1st and 9th Armies is ending. It thanks him for his service during the emergency. And it makes very clear that any future press conferences must be approved in advance by SHAEF headquarters. In writing, no exceptions. Then Eisenhower drafts a second message. This one goes to Marshall in Washington. It explains the decision, it provides the justification Marshall needs for congressional briefings, and it includes one line that will be declassified 29 years later, in 1974, when Eisenhower's personal papers are released to the National Archives. Bradley gave me an ultimatum. He was right to do so. Montgomery's press conference was a betrayal of the Allied spirit. I told Bradley he would have his armies back, and I told Montgomery that if he ever speaks to the press without my authorization again, I will relieve him regardless of Churchill's objections. Some lines cannot be crossed. On January 12, 1945, 1st Army officially returns to Bradley's 12th Army Group. The transfer is announced in a brief press release from SHCF headquarters. The release says exactly what Eisenhower told Bradley to say. The emergency is over, normal command arrangements are resuming, operations will continue as planned. American newspapers reported as a victory. Bradley's armies return to American command. British newspapers barely mention it. Montgomery's press office releases a statement saying the Field Marshal is pleased with the successful coordination during the Bulge and wishes the Americans well in future operations. But behind the scenes, everyone knows what really happened. Everyone knows that Bradley threatened to resign. Everyone knows that Patton, Hodges, and Simpson backed him. Everyone knows that Eisenhower chose his American commanders over Montgomery and Churchill. And everyone knows that Montgomery's dream of commanding the final drive into Germany is dead. On February 23, 1945, 9th Army returns to Bradley's command as well. Now Bradley controls 1st, 3rd, and 9th Armies, over 1.2 million men. The largest American field command in history. On March 7, 1945, 1st Army captures the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact. It's the first Allied crossing of the Rhine. Bradley immediately pours troops across. Within a week, he has 5 divisions on the East Bank. Within 2 weeks, he's broken out into the German heartland. Montgomery, meanwhile, is still preparing for his meticulously planned, heavily supported Rhine crossing in the north. Operation Plunder. It doesn't launch until March 23, 16 days after Bradley's forces crossed at Remagen. By the time Montgomery's forces are across the Rhine, Bradley's armies are 50 miles into Germany. For the rest of the war, 12th Army Group makes the main effort. Bradley's forces capture the Ruhr industrial region. They link up with the Soviets at the Elbe River. They liberate concentration camps. They accept the surrender of German Army Group B, over 300,000 soldiers. By VE Day, 12th Army Group has captured 49% of all German territory taken by the Western Allies. They've taken 1.3 million prisoners. They've destroyed the core of the German Wehrmacht. Montgomery's 21st Army Group plays a supporting role, exactly as Eisenhower ordered. Bradley and Montgomery never reconcile. They remain coldly professional for the rest of the war, but they never trust each other again. Bradley refuses to attend planning conferences where Montgomery is present. When forced to coordinate operations, they do so through staff officers. They never speak directly. On May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, Bradley and Montgomery are photographed together at the surrender ceremonies. They shake hands for the cameras. They smile. But people who were there remember that neither man said a word to the other. They shook hands, posed for the photo, and immediately walked in opposite directions. 28 years later, in 1973, Omar Bradley publishes his memoirs. He devotes an entire chapter to January 7, 1945. He calls Montgomery's press conference the most infuriating episode of the war. He writes that Montgomery's words were unforgivable. He writes that if Eisenhower had not sided with him, he would have resigned immediately and spent the rest of his life explaining why. Montgomery never publicly apologizes. In his own memoirs published in 1958, he barely mentions the press conference. He writes that he coordinated operations during the Bulge effectively. He writes that the Americans were overly sensitive to constructive criticism. He writes that if he had been given overall ground command, the war would have ended sooner. He never acknowledges that his press conference almost destroyed the alliance. He never admits that Bradley forced Eisenhower to choose. He never accepts responsibility. Churchill, in private correspondence released after his death, admits the press conference was unfortunate timing. He writes that Montgomery had a talent for antagonizing the Americans at the worst possible moments. He writes that Bradley's ultimatum was understandable given the circumstances. But publicly, Churchill always defended Montgomery. Had to. Political necessity. So what was this crisis really about? On the surface, it was about a press conference, about credit, about headlines, but that's not what it was really about. It was about 81,000 American casualties. It was about the 101st Airborne freezing in foxholes at Bastogne. It was about the 2nd Armored Division stopping German tanks at Selz. It was about Patton's Third Army driving through a blizzard to relieve encircled troops. It was about American soldiers who fought and bled and died in the worst winter in 50 years, in the largest battle the United States Army ever fought, and then opened newspapers to read that a British general saved them. Bradley wasn't protecting his ego. He was protecting their honor. He was protecting their sacrifice. He was making sure that when the history books were written, when their children asked what their fathers did in the war, the answer wouldn't be, they were saved by the British. The answer would be, they fought and they won. That's what the line was. Not ego, not vanity, not petty inter-allied rivalry. It was about accountability, about respect, about making sure that the men who died got the credit they earned. And when Bradley drew that line, Eisenhower had to choose alliance or honor, politics or principle, Churchill or Bradley. He chose Bradley. He chose honor. He chose the United States Army. And that choice, made in a quiet office in Versailles on January 11, 1945, changed the course of the war's final months. It put American armies in the lead for the drive into Germany. It ensured that American soldiers, not British, would be remembered as the liberators of Western Europe. It established that American generals would command American troops, period, no exceptions. The 200,000 number in the title? That was the approximate strength of 1st Army when it returned to Bradley's command. 200,000 American soldiers who Montgomery lost in 24 hours because Bradley drew a line and Eisenhower respected it. Montgomery called it American emotionalism. Churchill called it unfortunate timing. Bradley called it something else. He called it respect. Respect for the men who fought. Respect for the families who lost sons. Respect for the nation that sent its army 3,000 miles to liberate a continent. And in January 1945, respect won. If this story showed you a side of World War II you've never heard before, if you learned something about leadership and loyalty and the price of honor, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to Elite War Files, and drop a comment telling me what other untold stories from the war you want to hear. We bring you the truth behind the history, the real conversations, the real decisions, the moments that changed everything. This is Elite War Files, and we'll see you in the next one.